game mechanics in the real world to motivate action. But it's just getting started. The game layer is brand new. It has not been built. And so in order to get some insight into what this game layer is going to look like, we can look at what's happened over the last decade with the social layer. So before we jump into what the game layer is and how we can build on it and what it can do, I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the last decade. The last decade was the decade of social. It was the decade when we took all the digital connections that connect us to our friends, to our families, to our colleagues, we digitized them and we put them online. And the framework for the social layer is now built. It's called Facebook, and it now owns the digital representation, the social layer, for 500 million people. And to further cement their position as owning the social layer, they've created this thing called the Open Graph Protocol, so that when you want to build on the social layer, you build with Facebook. And now, it's not to say that we're done with social, right? There's a ton more interesting innovation that's going to happen with the social layer. What is this thing? How do we use it? How do we make it better? But the framework that we're going to use to build on the social layer has been decided. Unlike the game layer, which is now just getting built, this next decade is the decade of games, the decade where we build out the game layer. And unlike the social layer, which trafficked mainly in influence, the game layer traffics in, unlike the social layer, which traffics mainly in connections, the game layer traffics in influence. Rather than trying to add social context to where we are or anything that we see or anything that we're doing, the game layer seeks to act on individual motivation, seeks to influence where we go, what we do, how we do it, why we do it. And that's fascinating. It's really cool, and it's definitely just a little bit frightening. But because it interacts on our individual motivation, the game layer has the opportunity to be 10x larger in terms of influence it has on our lives than the social layer has. And so it's great that we can start thinking about this now when it's just being built so that we can look at this cool thing before there is the Open Graph Protocol for the game layer, before there is anything there, and we can think about how we want it to be built, how we're going to make it open, how we're going to make it accessible, how we're going to make it do what we want the game layer to be able to do, because it can do great things. And so with that, we're going to jump into the crux of the presentation, which is basically, what can the game layer do for me? Because if we're going to be building this game layer, and everyone is going to take part in building the game layer, we need to know how you build on the game layer, you build with game mechanics, and most importantly, if we're going to make it do what we want it to do, we need to know what it is that it can do. So we're going to talk about 5 really big problems that the game layer can help us solve. The first one we're going to talk about is school. School is a game, but it's a poorly designed game. It's kind of broken. I think a lot of us can agree on that. I'm in a fairly personal position to say that school is broken. As Hugh mentioned, I made it through 1 year at Princeton and then dropped out, which is okay, because at Princeton they teach you everything important in the first 2 semesters. The rest is kind of just about wearing orange and wearing shiny sunglasses, and I've got both of those covered. So we're going to talk about school. Then we're going to jump onto customer acquisition. Customer acquisition is a huge problem that everyone's got. Everyone wants someone to pay attention to something that they're doing. And we're going to talk about how game mechanics in the real world can help solve that. Then we'll jump onto loyalty. Loyalty is one of these really tricky concepts where we've built all of these very sophisticated loyalty programs that use game mechanics, but they use them in such an overburdened way that it's almost impossible for people to interact. So we're going to look at how game mechanics are being used to build loyalty in the real world now, and some other interesting concepts that are coming along. The fourth one we're going to talk about is location-based services and moving them into the mainstream. This is a slightly more specific problem than everything else that I've said out there, but one that's probably very relevant to a lot of people in this audience, certainly relevant to me, and it's been really fascinating to watch the LBS space evolve over the last couple of years, in large part at this conference. So we're going to tackle this one, but we're going to tackle it in a bit more of a generic way about how you take any service, which is inherently niche, and try and expand it to a broader base. So we'll go through that one. And then the fifth one, and I know this has all been weighing heavily on your minds, is global warming. We'll solve that last. I know it's all been bothering you, so I'm here to tell you, don't sweat it. We've got it covered, and we'll figure that one out right at the very end, so stick around. It'll be good. Then the 2 more things to mention before we jump into school. We have a Twitter hashtag. So if you, this is not the Twitter hashtag, this is #winning. You can tweet on #winning, but we're actually going to use #GameLayer, which will make a little bit more sense. Hopefully there's less traffic on that one. So if you have any questions about what the game layer can do, feel free to tweet them out during the presentation, and we'll tackle some of those at the very end. There will be time for Q&A Just to give some direction on these questions, we're looking for sort of big, broad questions that the game layer can ideally help solve, that game mechanics can be used to make easier. Things like how to increase fundraising, working with nonprofits, solving big problems. We're not looking for where should I go for dinner, hash game layer, or I can't get a date, hash game layer. The game layer is powerful, but it can't solve everything. So we're going to try and keep it somewhat on topic. Great, so that's the plan. And now we will jump into the first problem. And all of these problems are color-coded on the top. So if you want to follow along, you can see school is blue. So the first problem we're going to try and solve is school. School is a game. It's just a really poorly designed one. In fact, school is probably one of the most perfect game ecosystems that's out there. You've got motivated players. You've got a near monopoly on their time. You've got challenges, you've got rewards, you've got rules, you've got allies, you've got enemies, you've got levels, you've got appointment dynamics, you have to show up on time, you've got countdowns, you only have so much time to complete this test, you've got incentives, you've got disincentives, so on and so forth. You've got all sorts of things that basically make school the best real-world implementation of a game that's out there. But, unfortunately, it's a little broken. There are two major problems with school that I think we can all agree with. One is engagement. Students are not engaged. They're showing up late, they're checking out early, they're not doing their homework, they're not engaged. And because they're not engaged, they're not doing as well as they could be. And in large part, this lack of engagement comes from, in my opinion, the fact that grading as a system is broken. Grading is a game mechanic, but it's done wrong. So we're going to dig through that a little bit. And the second one is cheating. There's a lot of cheating that goes on at school. There's a lot of cheating that goes on in any game. So with cheating being a standard game mechanic, we're going to look a bit at how we can fight fire with fire and try and stop one game mechanic from ruining school as a game with another game mechanic. So that's the plan for school. And we will start with engagement. Because right now, school looks a little bit like this. People are bored. And engagement is an incredibly critical concept that any good game designer spends all of their time thinking about. Are my players engaged? Will they engage with this next challenge? What are my monthly active users? But in school, people aren't yet paying attention. And as I mentioned, they're not paying attention in large part because because the grading system is broken. What the grading system has done, and we will get to the toothbrush in just a second, what the grading system has done is it has created what we call the moral hazard of gameplay. It's replaced the real reward, learning for learning's sake, with a series of ersatz rewards, these arbitrary letters that we get on individual actions. And when you replace the real reward for the fake reward, people start to view the actions they should be taking to get the reward as chores, and they start becoming very unengaged. So we're going to talk about this concept of the moral hazard of gameplay, which is borrowed from one of my heroes in the space, Jesse Schell, and I'm going to borrow one of his stories that he uses to explain it very quickly, which is about the lowly toothbrush. And the way he tells this story is that you have kids, and you need your kids to brush their teeth, because brushing your teeth is important, having good dental hygiene. So you create a game. And the game is very simple. If you brush your teeth, you get 2 points. Clean teeth equals 2 points. Simple rules, simple game. So your kids brush their teeth on Monday, they brush their teeth on Tuesday, plus 2 points, plus another 2 points. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they've brushed their teeth for 5 days in a row, so they get plus 10 points, modifier, awesome, great, everyone's happy, everyone's got clean teeth. Then one day, you stop giving out the points, and this happens. Because you've replaced the real reward, good dental hygiene, with a fake reward, the points. And when the fake reward goes away, there is nothing left to motivate them to act for the real reward. And this is a huge problem in school. The exact same thing is happening in school. But before we dig into that, since I know you're all enjoying this image quite so much, should you like to find this to use in your own presentations, it is very, very easy. Go to Google, type in British teeth. It is the first result. So, you're welcome for that. We'll now move on. So, grades are failing as rewards. And this is a real problem because grades are our reward system right now. Grades right now are a mechanic. They're a simple game mechanic. Grades are simply levels. You've got A's, you've got B's, you've got C's, you've got A pluses, you've got A minuses. There are statuses. You've got valedictorians. You've got first percentile, second percentile. You've got all sorts of things. I mean, valedictorian is just a status. It's just a really poorly done status. If it were called White Knight Paladin level 20, I think people might study a lot harder. I certainly would. So the problem is that grades are a really naive implementation of a status mechanic. And the biggest problem with grades is that it is a game mechanic that you can lose in a game where we don't want people to lose. So there are game mechanics where you can lose in games you want people to lose, but this is a game, school is a game, where we don't want anyone losing. We want everyone to do well. We want everyone to graduate. We don't want anyone to drop out. So why have a mechanic where you can progress negatively, where a huge amount of the focus is on not failing, because failing is baked into the core concept of the mechanic, where you can go from an A to a B, or a B to a C, or an A to an F, just because you had a bad day. Why not create a grading dynamic that is based much more on progressions, where instead of having your grade be a weighted average of how you do on each individual challenge, on each individual test, quiz, going throughout the semester, why not start with 0 experience points? And as you do well on challenges, you do well on tests, you do well on quizzes, you increase your experience points, you move from a level B to a level A to a level A+, and you still end up with a totally normal distribution of students at the end. There's still a variety, but it's all about focusing on the positive, right? You can't level down. You can't fail. It's just how quickly do you progress to level B, or level A, or level White Knight Paladin 20, whatever you want it to be. Basically, I want to move from this, which is school right now, where you can have straight A's and have a terrible day and end up looking like that guy who's really unhappy, to this, where you have a progression dynamic, moving you through school. Because you start as, this guy who doesn't know much about math, and as you do challenges, you jump up levels, you get better and better, you gain experience points, and you become the mage of mathematics, or the master of physics, whatever you want it to be. But if I knew I was going to end up looking like that guy at the end of the semester with like the magic eagle hat and the sword of Mordor and his legs on fire a little bit, like I would totally work a lot harder. It's all about focusing on the end result. So to wrap up engagement, the problem with engagement right now in schools is that we've created this grading system that naturally leads people to focus on the wrong things, that leads to this moral hazard gameplay situation. And what I want to do, what I think would be fun to help with that, is to decrease the direct correlation of action to reward, have people focus on the end result, and the end goal would be to increase engagement levels in school. This would lead to people studying harder, doing better, more prepared students are more successful in life, and that is one of the problems that can be fixed in this particular game. So moving on from engagement. I said there were 2 problems we're going to tackle in school, and the second one we're going to tackle is cheating. So, because this is a section on school, would like to do a quick quiz. Can anybody tell me what is wrong with this picture? No? Well, it's a really simple question. He should be using an Android. The Droid X has a way bigger screen. You can fit all sorts of stuff on that. But realistically, what's going on with cheating is that we are actually fighting it with a game mechanic. We're fighting it with a game mechanic called disincentives. If you cheat, you get thrown out, you fail on that test, something bad happens. But the problem with this is that the mechanic is totally misapplied. The disincentive is not on cheating, it's on getting caught. And so if you look at these 2 pictures, the one on the left is bad because this guy is cheating, and look, the teacher can see him. That's terrible for him. But on the right, it's okay because he's cheating when the teacher is looking the other direction. And when you've got these misimplied disincentives, people learn very quickly how to play the game as you've designed it. We've just designed the game slightly wrong. So how are we going to solve this one? Well, there's an example that I want to use about how people have used this concept, the social fabric of gameplay, which is a term that's borrowed from Jane McGonigal, who's another awesome person in the space, about how people at Princeton have stopped cheating. And it's not that people at Princeton don't naturally cheat. For example, one of our proud alumni is this guy, who just as a course of habit likes to cheat on everything. So the question is, moving on from that, the question is, how do you take a 4,000 person community of highly ambitious people with a slightly off-center moral compass and get them to not cheat? And the way you do it is by changing the game. So what Princeton did is they changed the game in a really interesting way. They made it such that when you are taking a test, there is no teacher, no admin, no TA, no oversight of any kind. You walk in, you find the test already on your desk, students sit down, they take the test, at the end there's a box up front, they put it in the box and they leave, the teacher shows up again a half hour later to collect the boxes. There's no oversight at all. The only 2 rules of this kind of weird game are that you have to write down the honor code saying I will not cheat and I have not seen anyone else cheat, and that complicity is as much a crime as cheating yourself. If you see someone else cheat and you do not report it, you're just as guilty. So they call it the honor code. 2 very, very simple rules. And what this does, this really subtle shift, changes the game. from being me fighting against my players and against the admin who is this omnipotent enforcer who has the power to watch over us, to a game where it's me and the other players enforcing on one another, trusting one another because we're all in the same game, and it changes the enemy from being the admin to being the test. And Princeton implemented this, and they dropped the incidence of cheating from about 400 occurrences a year to 2. And Princeton's not the only one doing this, not the only one taking the idea of the social fabric of gameplay where you put the power back in the hands of the players, where you enable them to be the enforcers rather than having this omnipotent overseer. Other schools have been doing it. It's been very, very successful, and it doesn't even need to apply only to academic institutions. Imagine what the social fabric of gameplay would do to tax code and the tax law. Imagine everyone enforcing that themselves, the social fabric of gameplay on a national level. But that is a completely different presentation, which we probably don't have time for. So with that, school is out, and we're going to jump on to the next problem, which is about customer acquisition, and the color code for customer acquisition is green. Just to recap, started with school, moving on to customer acquisition. This is the second problem we want to solve, looking at how game mechanics in the real world can make stuff like this happen. And we're going to tackle this one in a slightly different way. Rather than going through some theoretical examples, we're going to take the company that has done the best job at customer acquisition, both for themselves and other local businesses, their customers in the space, and we're going to dissect it. So with apologies to Andrew Mason, we are going to spend the next 3 minutes breaking Groupon into its component parts, which is basically these 3 game mechanics: free lunch, communal gameplay, and countdown. And depending on how you value an email list, each one of these game mechanics is probably worth about $5 billion a piece, so probably worth paying some good attention to. So the first one we'll start on is free lunch. Free lunch is one of the most subtle game mechanics in the deck. Free lunch basically plays off of the consumer's own skepticism to get them to engage in a game. We've been taught since we were 2 that a free lunch can't exist, that it's too good to be true. There's no such thing as a free lunch. But we look here, and what we see in this case, it actually is lunch, but what we see here is something that is too good to be true. 50% off at an awesome place. It is a deal that is actually too good to be true. So how could it possibly be valid? So we naturally are skeptical, and Groupon is very careful to explain right up front that the free lunch has a catch, a requirement, something that has to be done. And if you look in the bottom part of the screen, you see that that requirement is that a certain number of people have to buy it in order to tip it. So it is a free lunch, but the skepticism is removed because the free lunch is justified. This has to happen before it can be triggered. Now, at this point, a bunch of you are probably thinking to yourselves, well, okay, it's not really a free lunch then because I have to take this action to get it, so that's sort of more a standard challenge-reward scenario, right? And the answer is yes, except the brilliance of what Groupon has done is that they can present the free lunch, they can play off of the consumer skepticism by justifying it with this tipping rule, and yet be guaranteed that a consumer never has to take any action to do it. So skepticism removed through the justification, and yet still the consumer doesn't have to do any work. Because 95% of all Groupons tip before 8 a.m. And it has nothing to do with any work that you're doing. It has nothing to do with you sharing it to your friends. It just has to do with the fact that they've got a huge email list. So they can show you this free lunch, they can justify it to you, and yet you still don't have to do any work. It is the ultimate free lunch dynamic, really, really nicely implemented. So free lunch achieved, and we will jump on to the second of the 3 game mechanics that make up Groupon. This is one of my favorites. It's called communal gameplay. And communal gameplay is a really powerful mechanic. It is based on the idea that you can give anyone a very complex problem, and if you make the rules clear and you make the goal clear, sort of decentralized networks of people can solve these problems very, very quickly. So here, the Groupon communal gameplay example is you need to, as a community, hit 50 purchases for this amazing deal to be triggered. And the way you do that, the rules are very simple. You share it with your friends. The goal is obviously equally clear that you get the great deal at the end. Groupon nowadays uses this sort of more as a Kickstarter for new cities. I mean, as I said before, most of the deals tip at this point simply because they've got such a large email list. But as a Kickstarter, this is a great mechanic. I think there's actually a lot more that Groupon could be doing with it, but they're already worth $15 billion, so I don't think they need any tips from me on that. The final dynamic that makes up Groupon is also the simplest. It's the countdown. Anytime you see a deal on Groupon, you're going to see this countdown ticking down, generally about 24 hours, and the countdown is one of these wonderful mechanics that is super simple, everyone understands it, but what it does that is so effective is it creates this humongous exponential spike in activity as you get closer and closer to countdown 0. There have been a lot of studies done where you take two equally sized groups of people and present them with an opportunity, and give one group 24 hours to decide, and the other group 30 days to decide. And the 24-hour group consistently takes advantage of that opportunity more often because the spike in engagement created through the countdown mechanic is so huge that it actually outweighs any additional sales that would occur over the other time. So countdown mechanic, really powerful one. Groupon uses it very well. And that, plus an email list, basically equals Groupon. And gives you a lot of powerful customer acquisition, and that's pretty much it. So with that, we're going to jump on to what I sort of referenced in the beginning. We're going to play the first of many games. If you remember back to the plan, we're starting with school, moving on to customer acquisition, loyalty, location-based services, global warming, 2 game breaks. This is game break number 1. And in large part, this game break is a practice. It's to get us ready for the second game, which is going to be, like I said, something very, very cool. But I need to make sure that all of us here can work together, because if we can't work together, then the second game is going to prove a lot more difficult. So we're going to try something out right up front.